Hello, my name is Anne Howard. I come from a long line of storytellers. My grandmother was a gypsy from Tipperary and my father's people were Italian. I was born able to read, and I remember the first time an adult showed me a bus ticket and explained that the little black blobs gave you all this information, and I found a surge of excitement about that. Since the 1970s, when I came here from London, I have marvelled at how much hidden history there is in Australia. And one of the first things I did was find a gypsy caravan and take my 3 boys out into the bush from Captain's Flat and follow the stock routes to see where they used to take some of the sheep droving. I was in Melbourne at one stage and at a party, and I was talking to this man I didn't know who was a radio producer, and he'd had a few wines and he was very miserable, and somebody had let him down. They needed to put on a play about Icarus, and it's one of my favourite stories, Icarus with the wings who flew too near to the sun. And he said to me, well, why don't you write it? And I went home and wrote this play, and it went national without any correction. And I thought, oh, that's what they want. So that was really the beginning of my writing career, and I was in my 30s then. From this play, I was asked to write a book about the history of roads. And once you've got something in print, publishers will listen to your ideas. I've had 9 short stories published in Quadrant, and several books, well, 22 books actually. I live in the Hawkesbury River on Dangar Island, and I've written 4 books about the history. I've got the heritage house there that belonged to the original people who owned the island, and collected all this wonderful history about this place. And people come to look at the house and buy the books, which is lovely to share that with other people. My latest 2 books are also hidden history. This one is A Carefree War, and this is about thousands of Australian children who were evacuated during World War II because they thought the Japanese were going to invade. And the women were here mostly on their own. The government wasn't doing anything much about it except in Queensland. So the women got together and took it on themselves to move their children away from the coast up into uncle's farm or grandmother's orchard. And it's called A Carefree War because the children weren't like our children now. They didn't really know what was going on, and they just thought, oh goody, going to grandma's, no more school. So I interviewed quite a lot of people with this, and some quite famous people were evacuated for up to 3 years. So it was a big part of their life. And my last book is You'll Be Sorry, and this was shortlisted for the 2017 Australian History Prize by the Society of Women Writers. I think it should have won. I love this little book. And it's about the women who managed to get into the army against all odds because the men said, well, they can't keep a secret and they can't fire guns and they can't drive. Of course they could do all these things, and they proved invaluable. There were 25,000 of them, and it changed their lives because before the war they had just been at home with their children. They got engaged and got married. Very few of them had a career. But after the war, they knew that they had all these great gifts and they wanted to give those gifts to society. So it was the beginning of feminism, really. So that's that one. Now, the book I'm writing at the moment is called The Kindness of Strangers. And it's about the children that were evacuated from England to Australia. And before that, the children who were forcibly emigrated to Australia, because I've often wondered why there was such social acquiescence and why the legal fraternity not only supported these moves, but actually were oppressive towards these children who were quite powerless. Some of them came out as early as 5 years old. So I've been looking at the legal framework and drawing all sorts of social conclusions from things people have said and the way that it was not really very well known. And it's just such fascinating history. At the moment, I've got data paralysis because there is so much information, but it is gradually coming together. So I think it would be a good idea if I could offer some encouragement to people who feel that they could write a book, because I think everybody can write at least one book, because everybody is interesting in their own way. And the best advice I can give you is there aren't any rules, except you must feel passionate about what you want to write about, because if you don't feel passionate, then why should people feel interested in what you have to say? That is the golden rule. I mean, I wrote this book for my mother, who was in the WAF. It's dedicated to her because it was the most important part of her life. It was the only time she got out of the home, and she spoke of it with great affection, as did the Awas when I came to Australia and talked with them. A lot of them said it was the best time of my life. So I felt passionate on their behalf, and I wanted them to tell their stories. So the other thing is listen, always listen, collect trivia, keep a folder and just put down little bits that you hear as you go through your life. I was sitting on a bus and I was listening to other people's conversations because they're much more interesting than I could write out of my head. And a woman said, "Oh, I just went to Gracie's funeral, she was only 35. And the lady said, "Oh, beautiful legs, what a waist." Now, you can't make up stuff like that. It's marvellous, you know. So I went home and wrote that down, and that'll come into a short story somewhere along the line. So that's another tip. Yes, if you don't write things down, because we're all so busy, you can't remember. So you must make a record of all these things. And don't be afraid to approach a publisher. For these early books that I did, I actually started my own little publishing company because I didn't want to have to trail around to publishers and keep being told no. And they were very successful books. Now I have my own publisher with Big Sky, and they're marvellous to work for. They're very kind, cooperative, and deal with you very fairly. So I'm very lucky. And they're asking me, when's this next book going to be ready? But you have to earn that. You have to show them that you've tried and you've got something, you know, solid that they can work on. So is that a useful way to give some tips? I hope so.